Good morning. Thank you for joining this fourth week of the Dolby Atmos Music Creation Series. Today we're going to be talking about Dolby Atmos mastering and hearing from two distinguished guests who are operating in the field of Dolby Atmos mastering today. Yeah, look forward to that. My name is Ceri Thomas. I'm responsible for content and studio enablement here at Dolby Atmos Music, and get to work with all of these fantastic folks in the industry. So I learn a lot from them, and I'm hoping that you will get some benefit too. Yeah, let's dive right in. So this is what we're going to take a look at a bit today. So first off, the ways to create a Dolby Atmos master, and then before we dive into the actual discussion session with Emily and Michael, talking about how they approach mastering and how they approach mastering for Dolby Atmos. It occurred to me that we had not actually covered printing a master file in this webinar series. There is information out there, but it's not being covered so far this year. So you remember from last week's session that the Dolby Atmos renderer is the source of, or the center of the studio. So in here we can and have for as long as Dolby Atmos has been a thing, been creating content in this format. So we have sunk it to a workstation, fed out the audio and the metadata, and it's captured and recorded all of that into a Dolby Atmos master file, or a DAMF, as you'll see it referred to. That's then exported to an ADM B-Wave and sent off to your streaming service of choice. Over the course of the last couple of years, the manufacturers that have been with us and deeply integrating Dolby Atmos for a number of years started to smooth this workflow for their users. So there are a number of them that set up a direct export to ADM. So that was going to allow you to, instead of needing to print in real time down into the renderer, allow you to actually export that ADM from your timeline. So it will take all of the metadata, all of the audio. You define how this is going to be created, and then print that out. The other workflow is still printing to renderer. So companies like Merging, Apple, Ableton, and any other core audio-based workstation are going to still need to print that automation from the source machine down into the renderer. Either way, it's pretty simple. It just requires some different steps. So let's take a quick look at how those different steps are going to be approached. So in those that do the direct export to ADM, there are different methods depending on whether you are a Pro Tools user, a Nuendo user, Resolve user. And these are really defined by how those specific companies have deemed Atmos to fit into their workflow best. So if you're in Pro Tools, for example, first off, you're going to define the connection to the renderer under peripherals. So you're going to connect to a renderer, and then in the I/O setup, you'll have the ability to map the buses that are in place there into the beds and then into the object. And there's a good number of parameters that can be set at that time. But you're always going to be defining what's happening on a mono channel of the renderer, of the busing. So if you've set up stereo bus paths, you're going to be defining the subpaths as connections to the renderer. In Nuendo, they have an ADM authoring window. So not only do they support export to the to the Dolby Atmos enabled broadcast wave, but they also support out to other formats of ADM. So their authoring window, very similar, allows you to add the tracks in your session to an ADM and kind of denote them as being objects or beds. Pass the channel names into the object naming, the description. It's a pretty complex and thorough, not complex. It's a thorough workflow, and very similar in Resolve. So in the Patch.io window, you're able to define where the channels of your mix session in the Fairlight mixer are going to connect into the ADM field. So a lot of different steps to define on there. Rather than focus on any particular one of them, the learning.dolby.com site that is a great resource, takes you from the setting up of a Pro Tools workstation or a DAW workstation all the way through to the final completion of the master and QC. Module 11 of that actually steps through all of these processes. So getting set up in Pro Tools for exporting your master, getting set up in Resolve for panning and defining your master. So great resource. I encourage you to take a look at that. And then the other workflow, which we have seen a little bit of last week, certainly in week 3, I think it was, is the Dolby Atmos renderer still serving as that printing capability. So in these workstations, you're going to need to pass audio out of your workstation. So one of those high channel count IOs. So whether that's the Dolby Audio Bridge and the data connection to the renderer, or something like the Horus from merging, that is going to define how you can export or how you can connect into the renderer. Then you're going to need to establish sync to the renderer. So the sync is so that the renderer output is going to match the timeline that you're feeding it. So if you wanted to go back after the fact and then punch in, for example, you're going to want to be able to do that at the same timecode value. So a couple of ways here that we can support establishing sync to the renderer. And frankly, they vary between the setups. So in Logic, they've got a really solid MTC generator that can work over the inter-application communication bus, and as long as the timecode frame rates match, then they will punch into the renderer, and the renderer will chase. In Ableton, in version 11, they've actually made some changes to how that sync works. So if you're looking to sync using Ableton, then there are a number of pathways. First being a generated LTC audio file, but also MTC is possible. And then in Paramix, you can generate LTC from the workstation, and that will feed into the renderer. You're going to then need to print a master file in real time. So in the file menu, you'll find a create new master file. That's going to create a folder of smaller files. So that's going to be the .atmos file, the .atmos.audio, and the .atmos.metadata. And that is then going to take all of the automation from your session, from the music panner, and record that down into that metadata file and the audio file that goes along with it. In order to then get that up onto the streaming services, you're going to need to export to ADM. So that ADM is the broadcast wave audio definition model. It's something that is universally accepted, and the Dolby Atmos profile is publicized, developer.dolby.com if you want to read that. But it's a common master file that gets exported, and in music workflows, it's also the intermediary. So we're using it to create on the the producer and mixer side of things an ADM file that can then be imported into some of the other workstations. So export to ADM is your key to success in that workflow. And again, this is covered in the learning.dolby.com module 11. So take a look at that. So in week one, we talked about some of these extra guidelines that are available here. One of the key ones is assembling an album. So in the stereo realm, you're going to be sending your songs, individual tracks across to a mastering engineer. They're going to sequence the album, put it in crossfades, make sure the levels are all flowing nicely, finalize the album project, and that's somewhat recreated in Dolby Atmos. It's anytime you're dealing with automation and all of those audio files coming together, it's a little less straightforward. But the mastering engineers that we're talking to today have been working in this for quite some time. So whether you're working in Nuendo, Logic, Blackmagic, Resolve, and all of the other platforms that I'm not going to list, the ADM file will take all of the metadata that you need, right? So whether that's the XYZ pan data, the binaural metadata, put it into that ADM file, and the guidelines that are in that assembling an album will help you to kind of get through the work of creating that album. Also, the delivery specifications that we published a little over a month ago here are part of this mastering process. So the goal here is to ensure that playback across the whole album, across other formats, and across the playlists and things are optimized. So if you're delivering an album, that -18 loudness peak of the average for a particular track should be the loudest track in that album. So everything else should match relatively to that. And then downstream, everything is kind of taken care of for you. As long as that principle is preserved, then you should be in some good shape here. So let's take a listen to our wonderful interview with our participants here. So Emily Lazar, Michael Romanowski, two well-established and successful mastering engineers, both Grammy nominees and winners, and very much respected in the market. Emily and Michael have both been working in Dolby Atmos and other immersive formats for a number of years, and been very successful at it. So a lot of work that's been done to go into the immersive category, for example, at the Grammys. So two people that have different approaches to how they master in Dolby Atmos, but ultimately you'll see that what they're describing is the transition from working in stereo into Dolby Atmos. So take a look at this. Michael Romanowski, Emily Lazar, thank you so much for joining us today on this this webinar. Obviously, we pre-recording this, didn't expect engineers to get up at 7 a.m. to chat to the world. But very
I've been up for hours, Ceri.
Well, there we go.
Go
That's
New
the
York.
benefit of time zones. But no, we wanted to bring you guys together as experts in your field, as advocates for the industry, for the processes that are essential to creating records, and to bringing the art out into the world as best it can. So I'll let you give a brief intro to yourselves, and then we'll dive into some questions. So Emily, you first.
I'm Emily Lazar. I have a studio in New York called The Lodge. We do a lot of mastering, well known for mastering. We also do some mixing. And we're loving working in Atmos, which is the new latest greatest thing to hit the audio world. And what else? What else shall I say? I mean,
Uh,
is
that
that enough?
that's
Google.
great. Yeah, Google.
Google.
Google. Wait, I'm going to have done a brief
Very bad
intro
at
for you as
doing
well.
the self-promotion part is bad. I mean, you know, it's much easier if somebody else says all the
Yeah,
thing, right?
cool.
But yeah.
Excellent.
And Michael Romanowski.
Then the other one on here, I'm Michael Romanowski. I own Coast Mastering in Berkeley, California. I've been, mastering records, doing stuff. All, like Emily says, there's sort of all the things, it comes with restorations, mixing, recording. Like, there's just, a whole host of things that go behind that. Been mastering records here in the Bay Area since the early '90s. Had my first surround room in 2000 and been working in 5.1 forward since 2000. So I'm just saying, I'm really happy that we've gotten to this spot where the consumers and the community are embracing the creative aspects of more than just 2-channel listening, 3 planes and having things around you. I think the potential of that is fantastic for creativity, and we've had a couple runs at it with different formats that didn't really catch on, and I'm excited now about how this is really starting to turn into a movement and an outlet for artists and creative people.
The two of you have been, involved now in Atmos and certainly in surround for quite some years, and you've been part of that growing pain with us, and it's certainly been one of those things that I've personally been very happy to be a part of. You challenge me every time you call, and it's fantastic. Um, but what have some of those developments and learnings given you? I mean, has it formed a process that you always go through with an immersive or surround mix?
Yeah, every record is different, and what we get delivered every record is different. We may get, and with specifically with Atmos, we may get something that's a bed only. We may get something that is, that might be 120 objects and no bed, or something like, everything is different, so the process is different. As with every record, stereo or not, for me, the first thing is to sit down and listen. Have a dialogue, as Emily says, talk to the artist, client, producer, engineer, whoever's running the show. Okay, what are you looking for? What have you got? Where are you distributing this? What's going to happen to it? Here's what I hear. Here's where I might go with it. Here are other thoughts I have about perception, delivery, those kinds of things. And then again, with the dialogue back and forth, they may say they want, this needs to be saltier. And you go, what is that? Okay, cool. That means more, what, 4K? Or, you start to get a dialogue with folks about what that really means, about how they interpret their perception. And then once you have a good understanding of that, then the process for every record, I think, is a little bit. At this case, we're still developing, workflow patterns, tools. We're still developing the tools, as you guys know, and thank you for answering texts at 10 o'clock at night and stuff like that about posing odd questions, to your point, because we're still developing the tools. Emily and I are going through this every day, working on projects and, coming back to the people making stuff like, Ceri, you get this all the time from, I know hundreds of people, but hey, how come it doesn't do this? Or when is it going to do that? Or this is what I'm trying to do. How do I make this work? We're still pushing the envelopes. We're still putting the corral in the Wild West. We're figuring it out.
I think to add to that, process wise, um, Atmos is interesting because there is this desire and need to go back to old catalog and older recordings and create Atmos versions of them. And so, in that situation, there is something that already exists, and so you have something that was done to the best of its capability in stereo, and then that kind of guides your process a little bit as far as what you're trying to accomplish, and then you can push the envelope even further because you have all this great real estate. And that's what's so exciting about Atmos, because it's like, you know, here's your mix on drugs. It's like so unbelievably cool. And yeah, it is mind blowing, even in the most subtle ways. And personally, me personally, I tend to enjoy the Atmos mixes that have a lot of movement, but they have really great intentional movement and that nauseating movement. That's not the kind of thing but other people may love that. I mean, that's, you know, I'm sure that's like a thing. This is just my enjoyment. I'll make whatever people send me. I'll make it as nauseating as they want. Just kidding. But meaning, you know, like to my sensibility. But you know, and I do actually do love the being inside the track and having that kind of surrounded experience, and it's very intimate because you can hear things in a whole different way. That's what's exciting about it to me. So process wise, as far as me coming to something, sometimes there's less of a really intense dialogue about it because it's so new, first of all, but secondly, because something already exists, and there's kind of like this, you know, push and pull and compare and contrast between that thing and the thing that you're making. So there's that. And then on the releases that are brand new, which are so cool and amazing, I'm kind of in a different headspace. So that's like almost a different process for me. We're setting up the same, and you know, the end result is that we're going to create this Atmos delivery, but the my mental involvement is a different, coming from a different angle, because there's nothing to compare it against, right? It's its own thing. So I think it's really exciting to think about people who are going to be composing for Atmos, like with that real estate in mind. And I'm looking for, like, I know that's a bit down the road here, but we're really, that's super cool to me. That concept is really cool.
You're both active members of the Recording Academy. Very excited that this year we have 2 immersive Grammys to give out due to the joy of COVID.
Technically, it's last year's Grammy and this coming year's Grammy, but
There we
we
go.
will get double the stage time at the premiere
That's
next year.
fantastic. Well, you know, immersive will be all over the place. That's great. So obviously the category is the album category, immersive album, and I think that's fantastic. So what goes into compiling an immersive album today, and is this the primary reason somebody needs to come to a mastering engineer, or is there so much more benefit?
Mastering, first of all, primary reason to come to mastering, whether it's stereo or immersive audio or Atmos, is the same reason. Well, for Atmos, it's the same reason that you would do it for immersive. I mean, for stereo. And I personally think that as strongly as I believe in how important mastering is for the final presentation of anybody's record, immersive is even more so, because there are more variables. You've got, again, when you think about perception and how things are listened to, that balance, when you think about somebody listening in a car and they've got, you know, 2 speakers or a laptop, headphones, whatever it is, you know, you've got a handful of potential problems. But when you're up to, you know, 12 plus speakers, you could have all sorts of level issues, phasing issues, tonality issues, you know, all sorts of problems that if you're not really paying attention to. So the delivery side of Atmos, for one, is huge. The mastering, you know, I know a lot of engineers who just go, well, it says mastering in the Dolby suite, so that's right? It's just done, and I send it off. And I go, well, no. And actually, there was, Ceri, I think I've told you this story before, but a good friend of mine, a good engineer, a fantastic engineer in Nashville, said, hey, I'm doing, you know, I'm working in Atmos and all of that, but he goes, I don't get the mastering thing. And I said, okay, well, tell me how you're working. He goes, well, you know, I'm doing this and I'm putting the files together and then I'm sending it out. He goes, but one of my main concerns is, you know, I'm only doing 5 songs of the whole record. How do I know it's going to work together? And I said, there you go. There's a thing, is like making sure, again, it's a body of work, not a collection of songs.
Yeah, I mean, mastering has always had an innate level of quality control in it. And this is a very important step for this format because um, the opportunity for disaster is far too great. And, you know, the idea of going to somebody who knows what they're doing and has heard lots of other versions of things that have been put into Atmos has an immeasurable value actually, because a lot of people who are doing it right now, it's the first time they've ever kind of touched any of this stuff. And so going to someone who's done things that are, you know, have already passed muster um, is a pretty is a pretty big value add, I think, as a person who's making something or a record label or you know, for an artist to feel more comfortable, just as it's super important in stereo. Um, However, it's not just excuse me, it's not just about it going out correct, um, because there's a lot of things that are correct that don't sound good. There's tons of things that are correct that don't sound good.
Or won't make you cry.
Exactly. So, yeah, so I think getting people into your loop that can help you create something that is, you know, deep and lasting and helps translate what you're trying to do is the idea. Same as it is in stereo. Same as it is when you're, you know, picking a mixer or picking a, you know, anyone along the way. I mean, those choices are important. And there are some situations where I think doing it all yourself has a unique charm. But most of those also at the end of the day get mastered by a mastering engineer. So they may have been bedroom pop records or, but at the end of the day, probably a really good idea to get out of your headphones and hand it off to somebody who actually has speakers and headphones and has heard the stuff before and can make some and actually has the proper equipment and software and hardware to do it. Probably be a good idea for you to put your best foot forward on your creation from your bedroom over COVID or whatever, to actually have somebody kind of help you go next level. And that's really what mastering is about, going to that next level, whatever that means, project by project. But so that it's vital actually. And I think we've, because the format's so new and it was a little bit hard for people to kind of jump into this and understand. I think we're really getting somewhere now by at least making it clear that there are people who exist to do this and love it and are interested in helping you, get to the final moment with your stuff and do it well. And so I think for the format itself, for Dolby and for the world and all these companies that are investing so heavily in it, it's even more vital because putting out tracks that are not appropriately handled and not of the right quality level only make the format look not as good as it can look. And so we really want the world to understand the capabilities and the how far this can go. And by putting something out that is average or incompetently made, that's a problem. So my suggestion and advice is to always find a team that can actually handle what it is that you're trying to do.
Having lived through the early days of Atmos, on the film side before I came back to this joyous world of music, I've seen that in progress, and that's where I'm really excited to see the product industry go as well, because you guys choose products for the way that you want to work, right? And so, Atmos should be an extension of those in my mind, so that if you're a Wavelab user or a Pyramex user, or you use something else, or Pro Tools, Nuendo, whatever that is, the workflows that exist for those should be enabled for Dolby Atmos creation, and I truly believe that we'll see much more of that as this market develops, and you continue to push these things forward. So thank you for being advocates for immersive audio. Thank you for being great partners in everything that we do, and really good friends as well. And for taking the time today to share what you imagine and what you believe of Dolby Atmos for the world. And yeah, thanks for joining us on this webinar. Two fantastic folks that have been, as I say, doing Dolby Atmos music mastering for quite some time now, and really great to have them on board and driving their manufacturers forward into how they need to operate. Had a couple of requests to put the workflow guidelines back up, so I'm going to go ahead and do that for just a moment. As Emily and Michael kind of discussed, this is a very much a developing marketplace. So the guidelines here are to help you to get work done now, and to show you how people are successfully importing ADMs back into Pro Tools, into Nuendo, using the ADM as an interchange from Nuendo to Pro Tools, from Logic into Pro Tools, and being able to then finalize and make the whole album flow successfully. So these do definitely work. They work in market today, and happy to hear from anybody that is getting into this. So one of the things that that Emily and Michael both kind of alluded to, and I think is has been since mastering started, a mechanism for why you need to go through a mastering engineer to finish a project, is actually delivering the intent to your listener. So you've all got these great studios that have been set up, but you want to make sure that getting out into the real world is going to do what you expect it to. So whether that's to tablets and mobile devices, playing back over headphones, in the home theater through various other form factors that exist, laptops, etc. Or as we spoke about in week one, into the automobile, lots of options to play back Dolby Atmos. The mastering engineer is going to use their experience for what works going from their studio into those consumer devices, and provide that advice to you, provide that wisdom, and support as you go through the process of releasing your content. So whether it's to Emily and Michael, or to any of the other mastering studios that you can find on our Dolby.com studio list, there are plenty of places that will be able to get you started. So this is just a small selection of those mastering studios. So Coast Mastering and Lodge, so that's Michael and Emily, but also around the world, and expanding on a day-by-day and week-by-week basis, other studios that are working in Dolby Atmos, mastering specifically for music. So very excited by that. And as I say, we continue to work with studios around the world, so both in US and then also around the rest of the continent. And if you are a mastering studio working in Dolby Atmos, as well as a music studio, I do encourage you to reach out to get yourselves in that illustrious list on Dolby.com. Love to have you and to discuss the workflow for your particular studio, and ensure that you're set up for success there. Alongside of that, for those of you that are working in music creation, and also then getting started working in in mastering as well. A number of great resources available on Dolby.com. Michael mentioned the mastering suite as being often misconstrued as being the final stage of Dolby Atmos creation. It is part of the final stage of Atmos creation, and the mastering suite name is a holdover from our work in film and television. But lots of great resources to help you establish your workflow and get up and running with Dolby Atmos. And then again, as we're able to move into the next phase of streaming services launching, obviously Apple Music have announced today, Naver and Vibe went live in Korea, so very excited about that as well. But the Music Partnerships team is here to help you get your content out into the world. So if that's making connections, helping you to find a studio, getting you set up with the workstations and the studios that are working, as well as then helping to answer questions about distribution pathways. We're here to make your life easier. So please use us, and we continue to work on those resources that are needed in market. So this is where we've been in this journey through what's new in Dolby Atmos, and how to get started working in Dolby Atmos, producing in Dolby Atmos, how to build your studio out, and finally today's session for mastering for Dolby Atmos music. We will continue to do this webinar series on a fairly frequent basis going forward as new developments come online. And if you want to take a look back at the previous week's webinars, those are now all posted at that webinar link in the bottom left-hand corner, right-hand corner. So check that out, and much more to come as this world develops. And with that, I'm going to answer your questions, and there are plenty of them in the queue. So there we go. We will get to as many as we possibly can. Does the ADM export from Avid or Nuendo include the binaural render modes? How to set up if you won't listen through the renderer, e.g. in Nuendo. So yes, all of the exports do include that binaural metadata. How that gets set up is slightly different. So we actually have the Dolby Atmos binaural settings plugin, which is a really useful plugin that can be added into any and should be added to all of your mix sessions. That's going to control the renderer to be defining those binaural render modes. In the export window, so in the ADM configuration for Nuendo, for example, that binaural metadata is an available column. As of today, Nuendo doesn't monitor that binaural, but I believe it will do in the future. But so if you want to monitor it today, then you will have to connect to an external renderer. So that can just be the production suite renderer. So you can do most of your creation in Nuendo, monitor the binaural in the production suite as you're going down, but still make use of that export to ADM. So just because you're working in Nuendo, which has the built-in renderer, doesn't mean you have to monitor through that. In fact, Michael himself switches back and forth as a Nuendo user to figure out what is going to work for him. Is there a workflow for Reaper? Reaper is a highly adaptable tool set, which makes it great for everybody. But you know, defining a single workflow is a bit challenging. So there are multiple ways to work in Reaper with Dolby Atmos, with the music panner for creation purposes. Obviously, they've got a very flexible bus system. So the answer is almost certainly yes. The question is, how are you going to fit your workflow into that? Because it is so heavily defined by each individual user. How to measure the 3 dB headphone limiting. So in the renderer, there is actually a kickdown menu with the little headphone limiter signal. So somewhere between the 0 and the 6, you'll find 3, and that would be the recommendation. Truly, if you're worried about it, then I would be backing off the overall level to not go into that headphone limiter at all. But it's there as a safety net, and so I'd encourage you to back off your overall levels for the master. You'll have more dynamic range available, and you won't be living in the in that binaural limiting. So be aware of that. Don't know if you're going to address this, but I found it difficult to hit a target of integrated LKFS. In Pro Tools, I've had to set up a stack of VCA groups to roughly control overall level. Now the renderer has its own internal limiters, but I'd rather not hit them if I don't have to. Any tips on adjusting overall level? So you are doing what most people do. And it's frankly the simplest workflow to achieve what you need to. So in that, yes, we're recommending some VCAs to kind of structure the volume for the track, and is also useful across the mastering processes. So if you wanted to balance across a number of those tracks, objects, beds, then the VCAs really do become your friend. In terms of mastering plugins and things like that, today, no, not so many. So there, at AES a couple of years ago, I was on a panel with with Michael and also with Gavin Lurson and Ruben Cohen. Gavin and Ruben had developed a chain of side chains and plugins that were operating across the whole of the master file. It was a process they used on the Perry Farrell Kind Heaven album, and was very successful. It's a lot of work to set up. But essentially, they built a mastering console with a lot of sidechain applications and flexibility to utilize different portions of their processing chain at different times in the track. Ruben describes it far better than I do. So if you're looking for a deep dive into what some of those workflows are, check out the AES video of that. I don't have a link readily available to me right now, but certainly something that is out there in the marketplace. So yeah, take a look for that. A lot of workflows exist for creating kind of bus limiting and things like that on the bed channels, something that we get the benefit of from the film world, certainly. So FabFilter and various other companies have done fantastic jobs of creating plugins that operate on those 712 beds. But yeah, watch the marketplace for more, is all I can say. So as a mixer, we should send the ADM file to the mastering engineer. Yes, that's largely what's happening today. So once you've created your mix and exported that from your workstation, if you send that ADM file to the mastering engineer, they'll be able to utilize and get back access to all of the pan information, but kind of the hard printed effects using that ADM. So if they need to re-steer or finesse something, or they feel like there's going to be a build-up in a particular area, but they can then work with you to ensure that they're not affecting your artistic intent, but collaborate with you to ensure that the translation of your mix and your intent is going to get out into the world and to all of those output locations. So not going to cover HRTF here, but there's a lot more going on in that world. So if your loudest song is -18 LKFS, what would your softest real ballad, not rock ballad song be around? Really good question. So in week 1, Ryan Olliate was quoted from his car experience. Ryan is an example I go back to all the time. So he wanted to ensure that his album and his flow was going to operate in the correct way that he was expecting. So this was the guidance that I gave him, which was to make that that loudest track be up to -18 LKFS, and below that just allow the tracks to sit where they will. So I believe the quietest track in that album sits somewhere around -27, but when played as part of the album, it fits right along. It sounds correct. It fits into the intent of the album. So there's no hard and fast rule about it, and particularly depending on the genre that you're listening to or working in, that will vary dramatically. But as it's noted on that specification slide, -23 is often a good integrated loudness for classical and jazz music to be at. They're highly dynamic content, and so yeah, sitting a little lower than the absolute target peak is going to help you. It's also going to help you stay out of the binaural limiting and the other limiters that are in the decode chain as you create your work. So hopefully that answers your question. With the -18 LKFS deliverable spec, do you have a specific true peak spec? Yes. So if you click through to that link, or if you visit our website, professional.dolby.com/music, you'll find a link to the full specification document that we supply. Each individual distributor also has guidelines available on their website. But -1 true peak is the absolute true peak that we recommend. So that value is also represented in the loudness metering in the renderer, as well as if you work in the offline fashion, you can use the renderer as a QC tool. So you can open up your ADM in the Atmos renderer and use the offline loudness measurement, which you'll find under the window menu, to actually get the whole reading for your track. So as long as your track is on the Atmos tab, not going above -1 dB TP, then you should be in some good shape there. What about limitation in Dolby Atmos? I know there is a soft limiter in the Dolby Atmos renderer, but is there a modifier, or how do we achieve -1 dB TP? So the soft limiter in the renderer is for monitoring. It doesn't actually limit the tracks that you're putting down. So you can drive into that that limiter, and it's only affecting your monitor chain. It's not actually affecting the ADM. The ADM limiting or the master file limiting should all be a creative limiting on your side of things. So what you put into the renderer is what it's going to send out into the world. So actively encourage you to make those creative choices as to how you're going to structure that track. So very much in that world. What's the workflow to achieve loudness and TP specifications? So I've kind of covered this a little bit in the past. So even if you're working in headphone only, or in headphones in your studio, I really encourage you to have the speaker metering up. So the speaker metering is going to help you to get to that, -18 and all of the other goodness that comes along with that. So if you're just going into the yellow on those speaker meters, then you're probably in good shape. Now, if you're on the center channel, for example, you're much hotter, and then the average level of the others is a little quieter. That's probably also okay. But in general guidelines, if you stick just inside of the yellow on that meter, that's -18 across the board. You're also going to probably save yourself from hitting that true peak at other mechanisms, at other points in the track. So which mastering doors and which Dolby Atmos receivers are Emily and Michael using? Really good question. I would have to check my records specifically, but Nuendo is Michael's platform of choice. So he uses Nuendo 10, Nuendo 11 to work on his mastering processes. Emily and Chris at the Lodge work in Pro Tools for a lot of their Atmos work. Although they're Pyramix users as well when it comes to stereo, and have certainly started to explore with the team at merging what that looks like in their workflow as well. The import of ADMs is really important for Dolby Atmos music mastering workflows. So they do tend to orient themselves more to platforms that are going to import that ADM. So that is Basslight, Nuendo, sorry, not Basslight, Resolve, Nuendo, and Pro Tools. So they will import that ADM, make use of that metadata, and also support the exporting of the final master. So that's basically where we're at. Expansion to other workstations. I think as I said, the market will define where Dolby Atmos is going to go, and I'd love to see other workstations come on board. Called out Wave Labs, because it was part, it's part of Steinberg, so it feels like an easy lift. But yes, I mean, if there are other workstations, make them aware of your desire to work in Dolby Atmos, and then send them towards our, if you send them to musicstudios@dolby.com, I'd be happy to connect them with the appropriate team here at Dolby to discuss getting that integrated into their workstation. I recommend some plugins for working in Atmos other than the Panner. Ooh, plenty. So the good news about Dolby Atmos, as I've said, a couple of times, is whatever you prefer working with in your workstation, it can go into Dolby Atmos. So if your favorite limiter is mono and stereo, you can still work in Dolby Atmos with it because it's just coming out of the end of the workstation and feeding into the renderer. So that being said, there are a wide variety of plugins available on the market. So whether that's something like Cargo Cult, who have their spanner, slapper, and various other tool sets that are designed for film workflows, but operate in music worlds just as well. Slapper, Nick Reeves calls out in his South by Southwest. It's a multi-tap delay that operates in multi-channel mode. Exponential or now isotope reverbs are fantastic and do a great job. Same with cinematic rooms from Liquid Sonics. Altiverb has a great number of plugin options for Dolby Atmos and immersive formats as well. So the tool sets are developing. I also called out FabFilter. So FabFilter with their L1 and R1s and all of the various letter and number combinations. They have a bunch of great plugins as well. So yeah, if you're looking for more, then that's great. Yes, one that I forgot, which is great fun. Sound Particles Energy Panner is indeed an awful lot of fun. Takes the energy that's being put into it and re-steers it into the bed, so you can get tracks that really move organically. And Nuno and the team have done a fantastic job of developing that. So ADM files already contain binaural information. How does an Atmos mastering studio deal with that? Well, the good news is that the workflows are in existence to be able to make use of that binaural metadata. So if you're importing an ADM into Pro Tools or Nuendo, my recommendation would be also to import it into the Dolby Atmos renderer. From there, if you put a binaural settings plugin in your session, there's a copy from master button that will be incredibly useful for you. And that's going to pull the binaural metadata into your Pro Tools session, into your Nuendo session. And then from there, the export of the new ADM will operate as you expect it to. It's also a good opportunity for getting Dolby Atmos mastering out into the world, right? So one of the things that you may not be considering during your creation is that binaural metadata. We do encourage you to do so, but the mastering engineer could also be that trusted ear to make some suggestions on that. So just because it was set in your studio to be far for everything, they may be able to give you some recommendations to ensure that that you are achieving the best possible playback across the wide number of devices in the marketplace. So I'm just looking through the remaining questions here. Ralph, I don't have a good answer for you right now. I'm going to find one for you. So from an immersive fan perspective, I'd be very interested in hearing what Emily and Michael and you consider reference recording for immersive. When I have people over and want to show them why I have all these speakers, I usually play them REM, Halsey, and Lux. 3 great albums, by the way. But I hope there's loads that I'm missing. So yeah, I mean, it's something that I enjoy greatly, is going to studios and finding new content. In terms of the tracks that I use for reference, there's a good bunch that we we set up rooms with. So the go-to Elton John Rocket Man, it's the first track mixed in Dolby Atmos for music purposes, and continues to be great. The REM album is a great one. Had a lot of time, good times listening to that as well. Newer tracks, newer albums, definitely take a listen to the Wildflowers album. Manny Marroquin just finished mixing the Carrie Underwood My Savior album, which if you've not listened to it, you really should. Take a listen to, again, some of the movement that's being created in that. It's subtle, but it's beautiful and it's balanced, and absolutely recommend exploring. And the market is developing, as we continue to say. Great new records come out all the time. I heard one master from an album that Emily is releasing, or Emily mastered, that comes out this week. That's very exciting. So take a listen to Soberish by Liz Fair, coming out this Friday. It's a beautiful work, and Emily did a fantastic job on the masters. So there we go. So we're actually joined on this webinar by Michael Romanowski. He's an attendee here, as well as being part of the video series. So if you have any specific questions for Michael, I can actually put him up into the presenter mode here as well. So if you do want to talk about anything specific, then please pass those along as well. So welcome to our live webinar, Michael Romanowski. You should be able to turn on your video camera. If the original stereo mix has used an analog outboard summing mixer, how do you emulate that in Dolby Atmos?
Well, I guess this means that this is assuming that somebody's getting stems just like they would to try to, buses, stems, groups, things like that, like they would in a mixer. I think if unless you have the ability to go D to A out to back to your setup and then back in again, you're going to have to find a way to do that as the best emulation with a plugin that you can. And there are many different analog summing. If you're only doing purely summing and you just like what it does in the analog domain, there's a whole bunch of plugins out there from lots of companies that do very similar things. So yeah, I'd say you'd have to keep it in the digital domain.
Cool. So question from Antoine. Do you get projects where people simply used an up mixer to add spatial cues in their stereo? Is that a thing?
Okay, kindness and thoughtfulness, yes. Sometimes I do get that, and it's generally not as pleasing to the ear, definitely not as musical. Sometimes it works, so I guess I can never say never with that, but in general, best case scenario is not to do any upmixing. I mean, it's like, it's actually, well, I was going to say it's the same thing, but it's actually a little more destructive really than doing upsampling from a 44.1 to, let's say, hey, I'm going to try to do DSD or 192. Like, you're adding more bits, but you're not really doing anything. In an upmix situation, there's all sorts of, and depending on the software that's doing it, there's all sorts of ways of taking frequency or timing or things, trying to put information in speakers, front, top, around, behind you, all that stuff that doesn't exist. And so it's kind of pulling things apart a little bit, and subtly, somewhat possible, drastically creative at best. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what? It may not be what you're looking for, but it'll be something. Yeah.
True. Yeah. One of the pieces that started Dolby Atmos music was the Rocket Man, and that obviously had a 5.1 version. And Greg very quickly moved away from just the upmix thought process into exploring the field that was available.
I mean, sometimes sometimes that's all there is. There's a project I'm working on at the moment where there's only 5.1, and the engineer needs to find out, and to figure out, what and always in consultation with the artist or the producer or somebody that's got a handle on it, that so they know what's going out that represents them. So you actually want them to hear it. But there are other things other than up mixes that you can do. You can try to simulate some rooms. Maybe just get such a small or a short slapback room or something like that that just gives it a sense of space where there wasn't before. There are ways to do it without necessarily trying to pull apart a dedicated 5-1 mix.
Yeah, totally. So a question which I'm going to take here is, what is the advantage of delivering an ADM file as opposed to just a straight binaural? If 2 mix, the ADM file would then only serve the additional 20% of speaker-based end users, correct? Incorrect. So the binaural is actually encoded from that ADM. So the binaural going out into Tidal, and the encode that goes to Apple Music and to all of the other streaming services is derived from that ADM. So the binaural metadata defines how that's going to be treated on the endpoint devices, and then from there, the endpoint device is going to do either to speakers or to binaural. So there we go. So no, don't deliver the binaural 2-track render output from the renderer unless you'd like to pair that as your stereo deliverable to any of the other streaming platforms to get an immersive feel without it fully supporting Dolby Atmos.
Ceri, can I throw something in that I found through experimentation and with sometimes the binaural is going back to analog processing. Sometimes the binaural is actually helpful to, if you want to do that, thinking you want to use analog mastering with the binaural file, then it's helpful to have that in that way. But once you lock that in, that's it. But it can be ineffective also for different releases.
Wonderful, thank you. What kind of deliverables do you usually receive for mastering projects, and from what format have you found that you prefer to work most?
So, what? Kind of like I was watching what I said earlier. I'm like, oh crap, I'm world's worst watching myself. But I did say something there about the every session being different and coming from different places. Sometimes I get ADM files. Sometimes I get it'll be just like 12 channels, one for each speaker, knowing that it's just going to be bed only and no objects. Sometimes it's stems. Sometimes it's a combination of. And honestly, I don't know that I would say that I have a favorite at the moment, because again, every session is different and has different requirements, different things coming in, different objectives, not necessarily different objectives, because translatability is always a common objective as well as the deliverables. But I mean, as far as presentation and how the artist wants it to really work. And so, I just want to, I want to be able to have control over the things I need control over. There are times I'll go back to the client and say, hey, you gave me this, but I really, could you give me that? So everything comes in different ways. And so far, we haven't really. That's the part about the Wild West. We're still developing the workflow. We're still developing the tools and the workflow and how we ingest and spit out, and what people know what questions to ask, and figuring out how much do they use the center channel or the LFE, or like all of these things are still being what's the perspective? Do you expect people to walk around, or do you want them just to sit still? Are they only going to listen in headphones, or is it going to be tied to something else? Is it meant to be out in the world? So like your car or something like that, which is awesome, by the way. And then yeah. Yeah, so just to answer your question, every session is different, and I haven't come up with a preferred way yet. Here's what I'll say is preferred: accurately label your tracks. That's what I prefer.
Yes, yeah. Audio 1 doesn't help you.
40 channels of audio 1, 2, 3, 4 really just ups the billing, frankly. So if you want,
there we go. All right.
You want to keep your costs down, keep your metadata.
Secrets from behind the curtain. So how do you use a limiter, and does it work with objects? Follow-up question: is there a 7.12 or 7.1.4 capable limiter plugin?
Yes. Sometimes I do use that. You know what I find about limiters? See, I mean, the traditionally you would think of a limiter as preventing overs. We're not in that world. This is not loudness of hammering it for hammering its sake to make sure that it's as loud as it can be and we don't have square waves at the end of the day. Limiting in this case would be more so something that was done for tonal texture and presentation and, you know, glue, or, you know, however anybody wants to characterize it. Yeah, there are a handful of things out there. One that I would say is as a limiter that I rely on a somewhat regular basis for that is crap, I can't remember what it's called. It's from Flux. I think it's called
Yeah.
ePure. No, that's the EQ. It's a limiter from Flux. It's one of their things. Yeah, and it's a multi-channel. They've got a handful of multi-channel that'll handle up to 16 channels. So I'm set up here for 916. I could use that on a 916 if I wanted to.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, the challenge there. Thanks, Dennis. Solera is the plugin you were
Solera,
thinking.
that's it. No. There's another one too. There's isn't Solera the compressor?
Oh, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, that's now everybody's trying to help. Anyway, that's thank you for that. Google Flux systems, and they will their plugins are fantastic. On average, how much have you found mixes are anchoring vocals in the center speaker, as opposed to using LR with a phantom center?
Sorry, say that question one more time, because I just found out it's called pure limiter. I was looking
Pure
at that
limiter.
when you asked the
Beautiful.
question.
There we go.
Yes.
So how much are you finding people use the center speaker? How many mixes are you finding use the center speaker for vocals versus a phantom image LR?
You know, I find it about half and half. Honestly, that I find that there are many people who rely on the center image as, and I'm looking at the camera, seeing my windows open here, so it's light. Sorry, the rely on the center image to anchor the vocal. There are several, you know, I would say a large percentage that start with the center and maybe do a little divergence to the sides. I've come across where there's only vocal, for example, that's on the left and right and not in the center. Sometimes it's artist driven, that the artist doesn't want their vocal to be soloable if it's in the center on their own. Other times we still have people who are thinking that, you know, the center channel might be the TV speaker, and they don't want that to be relied upon. So there's, again, the divergence to the sides. And I do actually a fair amount, I would say a percentage of things where people are approaching it as, you know, quad, you know, so, 4.1.4 type mixes, you know, and just leave the center out. If they're doing phantom to the sides, why not phantom in the center? You know, so I'd say it's still, you know, it's still an even percentage across the board for that.
Wonderful. Okay, cool. So time for one more, and it's a good one. Isn't -18 LKFS too dynamic for most popular music genres? Is Dolby Atmos mastering then mostly reserved for more dynamic acoustic delivered program material?
As somebody who's a fan of dynamics, you know, in music, I'm going to go with I like it. It's good to have some dynamics if you want. You know, sometimes if you don't want it and you feel like it's the sound that you're trying to go for, then creatively, I would never tell anybody not to do anything, because it gets them where they want to go sonically, and it adheres to their creativity. That being said, I find that I listen to things longer and more often if there's some dynamics in it. And, you know, to me, I relate that to a performance. You know, what makes a piano player or a guitar player different from anybody else who plays the same chords or the same feel is their touch or their feel. And those little micro dynamics is what makes us relate to art as a human expression, because it's different with people. When we take those out of it, it starts to get a little homogenized, and for me, a little uninteresting. So, you know, modern pop sort of sensibility to decide to push things, You know, I do find that we have a struggle at the moment as people are used to when you're talking about binaural, and if we're looking at 80% of the population listening to this in headphones, you know, they're used to a center image that's smacked at -6, you know, or as an RMS, you know, right in the middle of your head. And this is going to be a different experience. But I'm also very optimistic that if we come to some terms where we can all get to that, where loudness is not the replacement for quality or creativity or engagement, then it's actually something that pulls people in and makes them more of an active listener than a passive listener. So I'm a bit soapboxy with that for, you know, for me. It's what I like, but, you know, again, I'm here to serve my clients. And so if somebody wants something that just stays at -18 as this goes all the way across, then that's what I need to do.
There are others who are definitely more soapboxy, and you know, we have the benefit of calling them colleagues as well. So, Michael, thank you so much for joining today's session. I you know, truly appreciate it, and you know, for those of you that are joining this one versus the previous one, you got a technical challenge, but you got a guest appearance from Michael. So, thank you so much.
Appreciate it, Ceri. Thank you for all. By the way, thanks for putting all this on and all you do, and just, you know, throwing me on the spot here. But I really appreciate what you're doing to try to further this the integrity and keep the bar high. So thank you.
My pleasure. So yeah, thank you all for joining. I look forward to seeing you on these webinars going forward. We will be running them on a regular cadence to keep everybody up to date with new workflows and things that are coming to market. So watch this space. Check out the previous version webinars, and yeah, thanks you, and creating Dolby Atmos. So have a great day.